Hey guys, uh, let's talk about transaction sending games on Solana. Okay, so who is this talk for? Primarily, it's for application developers. If you're building any sort of trading app, trading terminal, whether it be bonding curve flow, launchpad, non-bonding curve flow, if you're building an aggregator, or if you're running a validator and you want to know how you can maximize your revenue, or my best kind of clients like MEV searchers, high frequency traders, and market makers. This talk could be useful. Let's start with the trader workflow. So I'm not going to go too much in depth. So you basically have two main components. One is where you optimize on the read side, and the other side is where you optimize on the execution side. So we're going to be talking specifically on the right side where you deal with priority feed, tips, etc. In Solana, execution is, let's say, a bit messy, to be honest, because of different scheduling types, different fee markets. You have certain lanes to get your transactions into the block space. Some of them are congested, some of them are not so congested. You have issues with very toxic MEV. MEV is very technical inefficiencies which arise in high performance distributed system, which creates an economic impact. Validators have an ability to reorder transactions that they maximize on block rewards. So this leads to a lot of like toxicity, but it's also useful. Like if you're a lender, you want your liquidation to happen at the best possible fill price. So you get access to features like reward protection, pre-post flow logic. But it's important to also understand that there's a dark side to this. Let's say you're a trader, you're swapping in size. You don't want someone else to place a trade before you and make your trade execute at the highest possible slippage, and then the trader does the reverse side, right? This is called a sandwiching attack. If you're trading or building apps on Solana, you need to be aware of this and you need to learn how to deal with it. So talking about the solution side, okay, that's a bit on the problems. There's a lot more problems. But a bit on the solution side. So the best way to solve this is that you understand what are the different ways, what are the different lanes with which you can execute your transaction, and you figure out how to send transactions to each one of them. You have SWQS, you have direct TPU port access, you have Paladin, you have Jito. And let's say if you don't have enough bandwidth to figure out integrations for each one of these, you talk to different providers. And what you can do is like you can use a nonce instructions to broadcast over each one of these providers. You optimize on priority fees and splurge on tips. There are a bunch of these providers: Zero Slot, Temporal, Bloxroot, our friends at Helios as well. We also run a simple, boring broadcasting product as well. So you can work with any of them. Now, before you choose any of these providers, this is where the fun starts. So you need to understand there's a huge subsidy war happening between these different providers. Subsidy basically means you're taking a user's transactions, you're increasing the tip at the provider level and then sending it forward through different execution lanes. This is not something new. Like some of the biggest builders on Ethereum do this. Uber does this. There's a whole bunch of research paper written around subsidy wars between like Uber and Waymo. China banned Uber from entering into the country's user base because they were doing very aggressive tactics. It's basically like a market entry ploy that you could deploy to get more market share, but doesn't really help users. It gives them a perception that it helps, but it doesn't really. So it's good to know there's like inefficiencies at the scheduler level that is also sometimes exploited. Another thing that you have to keep in mind if you're building any of these bots is that there's a huge market of tip refunds. Essentially, these providers, whenever a transaction which you tip lands over any of these execution lanes, which are not subsidized, they make a profit. These providers essentially act as cabals. And also something that you have to understand is as an order flow source, you can never optimize on the actual execution cost. It's done better at the validator level. So there's always a case where you will be overpaying. And finally, the business development guy at the application now has a function that they get to choose between, okay, do I get to provide the best speed, or do I give my users maximum rebates? So kudos to the BD folks. And another thing that you also have to understand in Solana is that there is a huge private routing industry as well. What private routing means is basically a way to propagate order flow information to certain parties who are willing to pay for that information, and essentially the order flow source treats it as a revenue opportunity. Some of the biggest players like Robinhood do this with Citadel, Virtue, Jane Street, etc. It's very opaque. It's very tough to get access to these industries, but it helps the Robinhoods of the world provide a zero trading fee environment, which we see is a very growing trend amongst like trading marketplaces. How does this happen on Solana? So you basically have the user's transaction sent by the app to an order flow relay service. They strip out the signature, take the tokens, take out the routes, and then send it to the searchers. The searchers then route search on these. They submit upstream a bid on how much they want to pay for these background transactions, and that it gets bundled up and sent to the validators. A majority of this value is sent back to the order flow source, which is the application itself. And then some part of it is kept by the searcher, and some of it is kept by the validators and the providers. Now, what this gives rise to is certain kingmakers on Solana which control the order flow. They have so much power on the network that they can orchestrate these deals where a lot of these routing happens between the application source and the searchers themselves without settling on the network. This used to be for the last 1.5 years between the validators and the searchers directly, but now a lot of the applications are believing in the fact that if they don't control their order flow, they're going to lose out to competitors. They're quite standard deals. Sometimes it goes up to a couple of 10, 20 million per year for some of the biggest trading venues, exclusive arrangements. It's like a vicious cycle. Another thing that you have to keep in mind if you're doing any sort of transaction execution on Solana is that pay attention to the scheduler type that you're executing your transaction on. So if you're executing your transaction on Agave Jito, there's a clear mix between like fee optimization versus tip optimization. But if you look at the Firedancer version of it, they blindly assume that the tips are more profitable, so the top of block is not accessible if you don't tip. And there are other scheduler types as well. Also pay attention to what position in the block that you want your transaction to land. On the left side, you have the trading bots, where sometimes you want the top of block space because it's based on the process state from the previous block on the trading terminal, so you want the best price. But if you're a market maker, you don't care. You just care about the top of block if you're doing sex decks, or if you're doing like general back run ups, then back end of the block is more useful for you. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys.